We are the bank to the banks. I mean, if we were not there, surely there would be other ways of handling it. The fact that the entire correspondent banking business, clearing of dollars, and 80% of Nepal's trades, I mean, goes through Standard Chartered. It's a very sound banking industry. We still haven't seen any stress. We have a very good regulator, a very proactive regulator, and the recently announced midterm monetary policy defines. Fundamentals are strong. A lot of the mergers are happening, a lot of the Nepali banks are adopting a lot of new.
Namaste, welcome to New Businesses interview. Today we have our guest Mr. Anirvan Ghosh Dastidar, CEO of Chartered Bank Nepal Limited. Welcome to the
Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste. And it's a pleasure and a privilege.
Thank you, sir. You have spent almost 3 years in Nepal as a CEO of Chartered Nepal. Before this, you were already work in countries like India, Philippines, Sri Lanka, Brunei. So, how do you see the prospects of Nepal as a country or as an economy?
So, firstly, thank you for the introduction. There is no comparison, right? And I think it's not fair to compare.
Right.
And I never compare. I think the prospects of Nepal are firstly determined by the fact that it has a very young population.
Right.
That we see that as a prospect, right? With the median age being less than 30 and a large chunk of the population being in the 40 years age. So that itself fuels everything. Broadly, prospects, I think, which are already being talked about. I mean, if you ask us as a bank, clearly with climate being a hot topic, the energy sector is, if done in the right way through sustainable finance. Agriculture, we think, is another potential opportunity which Nepal can grow. Today it's importing rice and vegetables, but it actually should be the other way around. And of course, there is, if we just look at some of the sectors which are outlined as per, the SDG goals, right? Nepal does have a roadmap, and if you look at some of the sectors again, our education, transport, ICT, a lot of emphasis on ecotourism, right, and health, right. So these would be the sectors we think are going to be the future in Nepal, and definitely the prospects look encouraging when you have neighbors like India and China.
So, what do you feel about the current macroeconomic situation of the country and the progress? You already mentioned still in the backdrop of post-pandemic or during the pandemic, in the especially banking industry.
So, firstly, we are all aware that right now the macroeconomics is attracting a lot of attention. Especially BOP and reserves, right? It's a hot topic, right? So first I would say is that it is not very unusual, given that many countries are going through similar challenges, pre-COVID, post-COVID, and we don't even know whether COVID is over, right? Against that backdrop, you have everything that is happening. I mean, as we speak, you have an issue in Europe, right? And everything that's happening with oil and currencies. I think in Nepal, what we as a bank are watching out for is predominantly three things. One is liquidity. Second is obviously linked to that is inflation. And then is reserves. Now, I mean, we could spend a day talking about macroeconomics, but currently the tightness which we are seeing in liquidity, that needs to ease in some form. Government expenditure is still around 17 to 20% of its budget. So there needs to be infusion of liquidity. Banks are tight and system liquidity is tight, right? And hence rates are up. On inflation as per recent reports are down, but with everything that is happening with imports and oil being a very important basket, is going to contribute to probably higher inflation in the coming months, right? And the last is, it's the favorite topic about reserves. The good news is remittances are not down. December is an outliner. January has seen an uptick. The good news is Nepal is sending out more migrant workers. Now, good or bad is always debatable. And we are back to pre-COVID levels. So, from that standpoint and the fact that the Nepal Rashtra Bank has, and I must admit that the recent midterm monetary policy addresses absolutely everything which is required for the macroeconomics in terms of corrective measures, deacceleration of imports, addressing the credit growth. I think coupled with all of that, Nepal should be in a situation which should be at a 6-month cover in terms of reserves or 5.5 months cover.
That's very positive outlook.
I think it's balanced. I mean, it's not.
Yeah. In that backdrop, how do you see the digital advancement in Nepal and how your bank is adapting to it?
So there are a couple of pieces to the digital advancement. One is we don't see Nepal anywhere being behind because the rate at which adoption is happening in Nepal, and again goes back to the point of having a very young population. I mean, if you can take a couple of examples like F1 Soft, you have NCHL, you have a lot of these bodies which are coming up, and the various startups, right? And given that the mobile penetration is high, it's a young population, the digital adoption is very fast. You see the volumes of Connect IPS and all that. They've gone, I don't know how many times fold up, right? Which is happening. That's one part. Second part is very encouraging is that the regulator's roadmap is also very forward looking. I mean, this whole recent regulation of interoperability is a big plus and a big signal, including the fact that in the recent monetary policy, the regulators want to bring in remittances to the organized sector. Now, from our bank perspective is we admire the way the local banks have moved ahead. They have certain strategic advantages of having only Nepal to operate within. Like we've got multiple countries, multiple systems, multiple legs of integration. But what we are very proud of in Nepal, we are the first bank which has come out with API integrated solutions for a lot of our corporates. We are leading the way on a lot of initiatives with both the regulator and some of our partners here in terms of adopting new systems and practices. So from that point of view, for us it's twofold. One is bringing our best in class systems into Nepal. And second is, I think the way the environment is moving rapidly, we also have to start looking at channels and partnerships. I don't think a bank can do it alone in terms of getting onto that digital roadmap.
With the advancement of digital revolution, as they say, how do you see the opportunities and threats? Like we have been talking about the cryptocurrency issues, bitcoins and all that. How do you see the situation?
Threats, let me start with threats. I mean, threats is just a word. I mean, you can put it across very differently. One is there are many new ideas and adoption and practices where we have to be careful before we jump into, because today regulations are trying to keep up with some of these things which are, and many have pitfalls. The opportunities are immense, right? Moving away from cash, getting cashless, real time, and it all obviously leads to consumption, spending, the whole ecosystem becomes integrated. Against that backdrop, you have things like, the need to develop very quickly a national ID system, all these things. And the Nagrik app is a great example, right? Which is a very, very good positive example. So overall very positive because the entire ecosystem is getting integrated. You've had RTGS come in last year. You've got Connect IPS which has come in. You've got the wallets, and regulations are keeping pace. So all in all, I don't see much of a threat. I mean, threats are common to every other country, whether it's cybersecurity, AML, financial crime, etc. But Nepal seems to be moving very fast and in the right direction, at least from a regulatory standpoint.
And what about the prospects and importance of sustainable finance in Nepal, and how do you see the role of SCBN, your bank?
So this is a very, in fact, this is a topic which is being much discussed. Even today I had a couple of calls on. So if I put on just the SCB hat, what is exciting for us is given the SDG goals everywhere, and every country has announced a roadmap, COP26, there are new ESRM guidelines. Nepal has potentially something like 40 to 60 billion dollars of investable opportunities, not funds. I mean funds. So, and across sectors which the regulators and the government has outlined. Our job is to showcase that across our network and also to the world, because if we just plot the needs of our own bank in terms of a target, right? And if we just take the opportunities for investment and plot Nepal, we would probably figure in the top 10 in our own network, right? So whether you take China, India, Bangladesh, Nigeria, etc., etc. So Nepal has that, and against the backdrop, we always feel that Nepal can be a basket case, because one is the immense hydro potential which the country has, and given the impact of climate and our commitment to climate, Nepal can stand out because it's clean energy, right? And then you have things like transport, where if you see the government roadmap up to 2030, electric buses, all those kind of things then follow, right? I mean, simply put, the import basket could change considerably if the harnessable power increased, and then the dependency on fossil fuel just comes down. So if you put all of this together, including agriculture, education, ecotourism, there is tremendous opportunities for investors, agencies, banks, FIs to look at Nepal to meet their targets and goals.
You talked about hydropower. Now there is a sort of bottleneck. Nepal has been increasing the production of the hydropower electricity, but has not been able to find the right market. And India has shown the interest, but there is no breakthrough so far. So how do you see really, the future?
I can't comment on that because that's more of a political question. But we feel that the industry is still very fragmented. Secondly is the financing, the way it's being financed probably needs to be relooked at from other opportunities like blended finance, different structures, and bring in what we would say as green financing, right? And hence it allows us to attract investments from a sustainable finance perspective, as well as to help Nepal achieve its goals in terms of energy and its requirements.
My question was actually to get the answer, like it is said that many hydropower companies, some 30% such companies are in a trouble now financially, because they may look good in the. Don't you think that will be a threat to the banks also, because they have already huge investment?
It becomes systemic, right? Which is why the recent monetary policy guidelines which addressed the specified sector requirements has brought in an element of fungibility between sectors. We feel that these sectors should be expanded. There's an Industrial Enterprise Act in Nepal, which kind of aligns to what the country wants to do in terms of economic growth. And we feel that the sectors need to be broad based and not just agriculture, energy and MSME. It can add a few more sectors, and that will allow banks to diversify. I mean, clearly the specified sector lending is something we strongly believe in, and it's for the good of the country and the economy. But we need some more sectors in it.
So as you said, Nepal's banking system currently is groaning under a very terrible stress of the low-level funds. So how is Chartered Nepal managing it?
So firstly, as a bank, we are highly capitalized. We probably have the highest capital adequacy ratio. So essentially, bank needs capital to grow. So we are very comfortable. Second is the structure of our balance sheet is very different to the local banks. Our cost of funds, and I don't want to get into banking terminology, but we are very less reliant on term deposits. We are more into current and savings account, which is the bread and butter of our business, the nature we operate. So our cost of funds is low. Yes, there is a tightness in the liquidity, but being an international bank, we have several other measures of raising liquidity. Right? So we are like everybody else in a tight situation, but we are managing over this period. We feel that liquidity will come back at some point, and you are better equipped to answer whether it will happen during elections or after elections or towards the end of the fiscal year. But our way of managing through this phase is obviously very different, given that we are an international bank and we have other options to bring in liquidity.
Now many banks they have raised the interest rate. Do you think that will also help easing the situation of the liquidity crisis? And second is, what would you like to suggest the central bank to come out with the managing the situation?
So let me start with the reverse. NRB has already addressed it in many ways, right? If you see the midterm monetary policy, right, they have, right. Today, credit growth is anywhere around 26%, which is very high. And I think the monetary policy target was something like 15-16%. So there will be a slowdown. And added to that is the way imports are being handled, the tariffs, the margins, etc. There is going to be a de-acceleration, at least for luxury items. So consumption, so it's like one cycle, right? It's one composite, I wouldn't say a vicious cycle, but as GDP contracts, consumption comes down, imports come down, there will be an element of arresting inflation and credit growth coming down, right? So NRB has taken the first steps. Now, the rates are an outcome. Banks are raising money at level because there is no liquidity. But the question is, are we attracting new deposits? It's cannibalization. So you might move your deposits from your bank to my bank because you're getting a high rate of interest, or you might be moving money from your savings account to term deposits to earn more. But the system liquidity is still short. I don't think saying that we will advise NRB is the right way, because we always collaborate, we always discuss very openly our problems with NRB, and we get a lot of help. I think what we need to start looking at is slightly loosen it up, right? The interest rate management regulations need a bit of change, including risk-based pricing. We already have so whatever you do, there is a net interest spread regulation, and you have to operate within that, right? And then you have a base rate mechanism. So without getting into two deals, we have to decide which one we should use, right? Essentially, fixed deposit rates are an outcome or a reflection of how much liquidity there is in the market, and that should be determined by the market. The rest should be capped and kept separate. So if a bank needs more funds, it needs to raise its interest, which means that it also needs to raise its lending rates, right? And that will allow the market to define the rates eventually.
That is right, but yesterday FNCCI had organized one event on the same issue. Were you also there?
No, I wasn't.
And most of the bankers they were telling that the interest rate will go to up to 15%. So that is a sort of risk, because demand is there, interest rate will go high. It means again the cyclic problem will be there. So what is your opinion on that?
In theory, you can't debate that, but we are still hoping there will be some form of intervention, at least in terms of expenditure. Right? I mean, you would probably know it better. Yes. What is the government's budget? Is about something like $13 billion, right? Yes. And today, what we've seen is probably only 20% of it is expended. So it's also cyclical that towards the end of the fiscal year, we see. In fact, if we just look at the amount of expenditure which is held back, which just comes into the system, I think the liquidity problem will get tempered down. Right. And that should happen, we hope, after Baisakh.
Nepal is currently also suffering from another stress, the stress on the foreign exchange reserve, which you also mentioned earlier. So how do you view the way Nepali authorities are responding to this?
Look, I think I answered this ahead. If to your question, how are authorities responding to it? Clearly, we are trying to slow down imports, right, to preserve. But at the same time, with oil already at 100 or wherever it is today as we speak, we need to find a way of raising dollars. That's one. But at the same time, if you look at remittances, while we can argue year on year it's down, during COVID, obviously, across markets which are dependent on remittances, the numbers went up, right? Because nobody was keeping it. The other thing we need to remember is as the currency fluctuates, remittances increase, right? So suddenly, if the dollar is where it is, if I am a worker overseas, I will want to send more money home, right? Because of the exchange. So it has a dual effect, right? So the government has already taken steps, and I think the right steps in terms of curbing imports. We slid down very fast from a 9 to 10 months cover to today it's probably 6.2 months. Five, it's not precarious. A 5 months, 5.5 months import cover is still good enough. And we think that probably Nepal will stabilize at that level. It would be worrying if the rate of decrease accelerates, but we doubt it will.
My expectation was that maybe you will give some idea on how to bring more remittance, because all the remittance are not coming in from the right channel. Is there any solution you see, if maybe digitally or otherwise?
No, one is if you see in the external sector recommendations, NRB already has made recommendations on the remittance side, and the NRN bit is a big step. That is the future of Nepal. You have similar thing in Bangladesh and India, like the NRIs, the non-resident. So those two have already. I don't think we are solving the problem by just sorting out remittances, because we've become a remittance-led economy in Nepal. We have to diversify to a infrastructure-led economy, and that is what we would push for and recommend, because how long will you keep sorting out remittances? Because at some point other factors like tourism, with infrastructure going, other means of raising foreign exchange have to come in.
What about Standard Nepal bringing in foreign exchange loan to help buttress the forex crisis, for example, from the Standard group members or anything like that?
So it's nothing new. I mean, I can't get into details of the transaction, but as an international bank, we do have an ability to raise for funding, right? And we are in talks with the regulator on developing some structures at this juncture. We've done it in many markets. I'm not sure you are aware of this fact that being the banker to banks, we bank all the banks in Nepal. There is a substantial amount of lending which happens to the local Nepali banks offshore to raise funds, right? So which we are anyway doing, which comes in to the balance sheets of the bank. So to answer your question, it's already ongoing, right? I mean, most of the trade and the foreign exchange is cleared through Standard Chartered, and we have a sizable portion of loans to the local banks on our portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, your focus is always on wholesale banking. So what would you like to suggest to manage the frequent steep rise and fall in the interest rates? We already talked about it. Still, is there any other solution? And let's skip this. I think
we can. I'll answer it in short. I mean, it's a very good question. One is, as we aim to develop financial markets in Nepal, we have to develop a transactable benchmark curve, right? There is no long-term benchmark curve or a bond market where we can benchmark pricing. Today the treasury bills are very volatile. So it's very difficult for banks to have a transactable curve which you can refer to. So a reference curve has to be developed in partnership with the regulator, where banks can benchmark their pricing. So that's the first step, right? Second is, like I said, on the interest rate management side, we will have to decouple certain things. Some will be market led and some will be based on a cost of funds or a base rate mechanism. That is the international practice, and I'm hoping we'll get there in some day.
Right. Some people are also suggesting to go for credit rationing, and the NRB is actually trying in similar lines. So what is your take on that? Is your bank meeting those sectoral targets fixed by NRB?
So you have two questions. One is credit rationing is very different, and sectoral targets are very different. So credit rationing, I think we alluded to it, that given the current regulations, there is move to bring down credit growth rates. So we are already in the high 20s, should come down to high teens. So that is an outcome of pricing. So as loans get expensive, we are assuming people will borrow less. and also in which category people will borrow. Will it be luxury cars? Will it be just cars? Will it be housing? Which will be, so that is automatically we are going to see a trend. And if liquidity is tight, where will people borrow from? So that's the first. Specified sector lending, we are bound by regulation like any other bank. As of January, we've met all our targets. It's an ongoing target. It keeps moving. There are sectors like MSME, etc., which is a challenge for all banks. And the new regulations or the recent monetary policy guidelines, I think, are looking much more forward looking because there's fungibility. It also recognizes the kind of bank you are and hence how you should participate. I think that's a great step which the NRB has done because all of us are not the same.
Right. So from that angle, how is SCBNL investment in agriculture and hydropower, and how do you evaluate the prospects in such sectors? What is your suggestion on that?
So the targets we have met and we'll continue to meet. The question is how do we meet, right? And that how is very different from a local bank and us because our balance sheet size is different, our scale is different, our participation model is different, our risk appetite is different, right? And like I said that the directive for SSL has already gone through a bit of change, right? We are probably more keen on the agricultural sector because it's like being a force for good. Energy already has, it's a demand and supply. And we feel at some point in time the regulations around energy will change because you can have only that many hydro projects, right? And if you can't transfer the power, then something comes to a stand. Whereas agriculture is the future, right? Because we believe both MSME and agri is definitely the way forward.
As a business journalist, what I feel is a pen on the neck of the many banks because I think it's 15% NRB has told the bankers to do it, but it's difficult for them because there are very few who are really in the commercial agriculture. So what is your experience in Nepal?
See, having worked in many markets and dealt with many regulators, we will refrain from using the word pain. There are challenges everywhere, right? And the intent of the regulator is to do good for the economy, right? I think within the sectoral targets, what needs to happen and probably is going to happen slowly is who participates and how that bank participates. Because today, if you look at the cooperative banks, they are also doing a lot of MSME. A-class banks are also participating. So there is a kind of unhealthy competition which is not required because different categories of banks serve a different purpose in the economy and the market, right? That recognition I think is slowly coming in. And hence, while the goal will be the same, the participation, so to give you an example, instead of going directly into that segment, we probably might risk participate with a bank which is participating in that segment, right? There are different ways of doing it, right? All of us can contribute, but the way we are contributing will probably change. So then to your point, that pain goes away.
Okay. We all know that Standard Chartered is the only truly international bank operating in Nepal, while there are also a number of other foreign investment banks existing here. So when foreign banks were invited to operate here, the expectation was that they would help in export promotion, foreign investment facilitation, transfer in technology and know-how. And how do you evaluate the delivery of Standard Chartered on those parameters?
I thought you would tell us what we have done because
we have been writing, but I want from the horse's mouth.
No, it's not something which has come to a stop that we have done so much and this is it. I mean, the basic fact is, given that the network we have, right, that is the biggest value we bring to Nepal, which is very common, right? And if you plot that to some of the FDI which is happening, both India, China, Japan, Korea, some of the investments, some of the projects, they've all come through Standard Chartered. Either through Standard Chartered in those countries or us putting our hand up and telling our counterparts in that. So it's a natural flow for investors. And we are present in Africa Middle East, South East. We are very strong in these markets. Even in the subcontinent, we have a very big presence even in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. So that is the fundamental part of it. Second is the biggest value, I think what we do here is that we are the bank to the banks. I mean, if we were not there, surely there would be other ways of handling it, but the fact that the entire correspondent banking business, clearing of dollars, and 80% of Nepal's trades, I mean, goes through Standard Chartered in terms of documentation, LCs, etc. Right? So we take a lot of pride in being systemic from that point of view. Right? Third is the entire space of development organization. I hope you know that we are the pension, we are the medium through pension is paid for the British Gorkhas, right? Which is a very big service which we do, and not from a profit standpoint, but as a service which we do in partnership with the British government and their defense authorities. And then there are many others, right, under the DO space. Now, you did make a point that we focus a lot more on wholesale. I would disagree. Our retail business is also being reshaped. We have a very strong retail business, while we only have a very few branches. But we are more into the business banking and SME space also, and on the affluent space. We can't be everything in Nepal.
That is true. But can you elaborate something on MSME, or how you are managing it?
Different banks define MSME very differently, right? For us, business banking encompasses the sector between corporate, our definition of corporate, and the lower end of SME. And that is a very sizable chunk for Nepal, which is trading, imports, exports, and there are a lot of business houses. And our retail bank is more geared towards that in terms of lending, operating accounts. And that is where a lot of the system solutions which we give. We are a trade bank essentially, and given that it's an import-based economy, we bank a lot of the multinationals and a lot of the flow business. That is where our retail bank is more geared towards the businessmen, the business houses, and under that there is an ecosystem, whether it's personal banking, etc., etc.
SCBNL seems deriving good income from fees. So a lot of this may be coming from international transactions and government bills. So how is the share of discounting bills issued by one of the local parties or another?
Fees in Nepal are capped, and the fee income lines as an industry is very limited in Nepal. It's all capped, right? It is net interest income or interest income, which is the biggest. It's almost 70 to 80% for any bank. I wish there were more opportunities for fees, but there aren't. So, of the trade volumes in the country on a direct basis, it can't be more than 2-3%. But if you look at the whole ecosystem of Nepal, probably 80% go through SCB systems, because all of them have correspondent banking, and we are their bank eventually. Do all the transactions earn fees for us? No, it doesn't. So at a certain level we are at par. The international business is very different because local banks have international needs, and it is done through our network. It doesn't reflect on the books of SCBNL, right? We have represented. So that's the way it is. I don't know which particular point, because we also have an onshore and offshore business, so it depends what is being alluded to.
Okay. Another question is about this. Nepali authorities have granted certain exceptions to SCBNL, which you also said that in some regulatory requirements, such as opening branches. In fact, brick and mortar branches may not be so relevant with the expansion of new technology adoption. So how is the reach of your bank to the people residing in the remote areas, or is it not required?
So let me rephrase that. Our question is it required? Because there are, so in the A-class commercial bank there were 28 banks, right? And are we going to fill that gap? No, because everybody is already looking at that gap. That's point number one. Second is our participation. See, we are an international bank. As an international bank, we cannot have the same participation model as a local bank. And we are very open about it. I mean, because we started by saying that we are the banker to the banks. Our retail banking business is geared towards business banking. We do 10 other things. We even bank the regulator. Our point is our participation model has to be very defined, and we need to bring a certain amount of value and purpose into Nepal. We can't be doing everything. Now, let me finish. I don't think there are exceptions for Standard Chartered. There are probably items which are still open with the regulator and being debated. Yes, our participation model doesn't define us opening a lot of branches. But who knows, we might open variants of branches in the future, but clearly the plan is to go to digital and find a partner. I mean, we might even partner with a local bank to expand our reach in certain segments. But what we need everybody to appreciate that our participation model in Nepal is different. And we are not saying treat us differently, but identify us differently. I mean, in other markets, foreign banks have different sets of regulation because their participation is very different. So that's what we are saying.
So another question related to technology, banking service users in Nepal are suffering from the problems related to KYC requirements. So what is your bank handling it? How is?
So we are in line with our global practices, and in the defense of Nepal, I would say is that the industry actually is not very far behind. I mean, the practices which NRB adopts are in line with any international standards. I mean, today I really don't see anybody complaining about KYC. I mean, today if you get onto a flight, look at the number of documents you are producing. Right? You still need your ID, you still need your PCR, you still need your vaccine certificate, everything. I mean, KYC is pretty standard. I mean, everywhere you have to give your mobile number. What is good is that things like Nagrik app and others are allowing e-KYC, and that would bring down a lot of the problems. To make it easy at a touch point to upload your Nagrikta card or your tax card and move on very quickly.
Standard Chartered is present in China also, and it is working also in BRI, right? So at present Nepal is not able to export to China or bring any Chinese investments. So in your opinion, what should Nepal do to improve this?
So my first question is really, I mean, I see so many Chinese goods in Nepal. I mean, everywhere you see Chinese items, right?
Yeah.
But my serious answer to that would be, firstly, I don't agree. 16% of the FDI basket is from China. It's still a sizable number. Second is, obviously, given our presence in mainland China, we are recipients of BRI projects, right, which are channeled through us because it's a very logical explanation given the network we have. I think what Nepal needs to do is really identify what are the items it can export. I mean, the import side is very clear because a lot of FDI is infrastructure led. Highways, airports, etc., roads. But does Nepal want to export carpets? Does it want to export medicines? Now that we as a bank can't do. I think the chambers of commerce, the bodies concerned, have to really identify what are Nepal's strengths. And Nepal does have, right?
Anything else would you like to highlight, sir, regarding Nepali banking or digitalization or anything that helps Nepali banking to go forward?
No, the good news is that it's a very sound banking industry. We still haven't seen any stress. We have a very good regulator, a very proactive regulator, and the recently announced midterm monetary policy defines that. Fundamentals are strong. A lot of the mergers are happening, a lot of the Nepali banks are adopting a lot of the new age digital practices. So everything is in the right direction. I think what only remains is the development of the financial markets, whether it's capital markets, having a bond market, whether it's to have swap mechanisms, hedging mechanism. Once the capital markets and the financial markets develop further, there will be further capital inflows and banks will be able to rise to the occasion.
Right. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.